Our gospel this morning is taken from the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verses 10 through 12. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" So far our text. Please be seated. Dear Christian friends, we are back in the courtroom again for our sermon in our series, Cross-Examination. It's very common for questions to be asked back and forth because, again, we want to figure out what the truth is. And yet once in a while you hear a question that the prosecuting attorney or the defense attorney doesn't really want an answer to. You were with Colonel Mustard with the pipe in the library, weren't you? That accusing question assumes that there was some guilt, and the guy's asking it just kind of for everybody to hear. It's a rhetorical question. This is what we have today. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? This isn't the first time that Jesus has used rhetorical questions. If you go to the Gospel of Matthew, you'll hear him say, "What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeit his soul?" Doesn't really need an answer, of course. It doesn't do you any good. Or what can a man gain in exchange for his soul? Well, nothing. Because what does it matter if you're burning in hell? That's all that matters. Your eternity. These are rhetorical questions. And so we're going to look at this rhetorical question. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? And you're going to see that this question answers an objection to Jesus' suffering. And you're going to see that this question answers our objection to our suffering as well. The picture that this question uses isn't necessarily a familiar one. I think all of us like to look at a cup of whatever that is, and you just want to drink it because it looks good. And yet when you hear Jesus say, "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" do you think he's talking about a latte? No. It's a very common expression as you go into the Old Testament and you see the prophets talk about the cup of suffering or the cup of God's wrath, and you drink it down to its dregs. We don't drink dregs anymore in 2017. That's gross. The picture was that of suffering or anger or wrath, and you drink it down to the bitter end, just the worst of it. You took it all. That is the picture that we have. And it is that picture of suffering that you saw graphically portrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it crescendos all the way through the Passion accounts until today, as we saw Jesus finish that cup. When he said, "It is finished," he hung on the cross. Did you understand why it was a big deal for the Apostle John to talk about the water and blood that flowed from Jesus' side, and how the person who saw it was really there and spoke the truth? When blood pumps through your veins and you're cut, do you know how it comes out of you? Blood, solid red. When you stop breathing, stop living, the blood stops, and what happens immediately? It separates. The water and the plasma. That's exactly what happened. Jesus was really dead. This was the cup that he was about to drink. And the prayers that he offered were that, "Lord, I don't know if I can do this. Do I really want to do this?" We don't know exactly what Jesus said. We can only imagine how those prayers went in the Garden of Gethsemane, and yet Jesus went through that passion for us. Well, we have God the Father's answer to this rhetorical question, "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Yeah, you're going to. This is really going to happen. Now, Jesus has no problem at all going through and drinking the cup that the Father has given him. But what about the disciples? Were they so ready to handle all of this talk about God's wrath and Jesus' suffering? Was that really an option? I don't think that was something that the disciples were interested in, were they? The disciples said, Lord, never. This is never going to happen. This is Peter, of course. Peter's the one who speaks first and worries about the consequences later. He wears his heart in his sleeve, and yet as he goes through this, it's very obvious that Peter doesn't want Jesus. Jesus, what good are you dead? Who really wants a Messiah who's dead? What kind of rescue can you offer us? There's no peace. There's no order to our society. King David's throne won't be restored. That's not possible. Peter even lashes out and slices off an ear. That's his bravery. And that isn't really a good ending, is it? Well, Jesus, of course, is not afraid of going through any of this. In fact, there are people who just want to see that. They want to see war end, an end to hunger, an end to poverty. Disciples still today are not really interested in the cross, are they? They just want to see an end of all crime, an end of all heartache. That's what Jesus came to offer us, right? To make the world a better place. They miss completely the purpose. And they want that same physical Messiah who will just kind of make things okay. But that isn't what our God is after, is it? Because what good does it do if all the real problems in life aren't taken away? Well, people have a fix for that too. Have you ever heard of the anger room? This was in the news this past week. It's been around since, I believe, 2008. If you want the opportunity to go and relieve some stress, you can pay, $50 for a half hour or so, and they'll give you a TV to destroy. Now that sounds ridiculous. And yet this is a great way, people think, to handle your problems. In fact, maybe some people have already tried this. Instead of taking that furniture to Goodwill, why don't you just take it in the backyard and destroy it yourself? That would make you feel better. That's the best our society has to offer. I'm not saying this is a good idea. However, this is one of the alternatives to dealing with reality. This is all leading up to the crescendo, or well, you know where it goes. Drinking the dregs of God's wrath. The problem is that none of these happy thoughts or places where you can release your frustration deal with the guilt inside your soul. None of these really answer the question, what will happen on the last day when you stand before the judge? We're going to talk about that in our Bible class. Well, none of these really answer the question about the wrath of God that is waiting for you, unless you deal with it. Your sin is real. Your rebellion is real. All of God's laws are real. And so you can ignore or try to act like it doesn't exist, but that doesn't really help. All that's left is you in God. And that's not a place where I would like to stand. A far better place to stand is at the foot of the cross. To see in horror, what wondrous love is this? That caused the Lord of bliss to bear the dreadful curse for my soul. That spiritual song is haunting as you repeat those words, and yet there is no other place where we can go to find relief. And that is an answer to the objection to the suffering. Shall Jesus not drink the cup the Father has given him? Of course he will. It's a rhetorical question. And so that also helps us, not through Jesus and why he had to go through it, and the answer that we find in him, but it's the answer to our own suffering. I don't know if you've had a chance. It's kind of snuck up on me. There have been mudslides in Central America yesterday. And if you look, the pictures, I know I was born out in California, but I don't think you really understand what an avalanche of mud does in a mudslide and the incredible weight. There are pictures, I don't have any here, of huge boulders in the middle of the town that ought not be there because the earth was just washed away and the people are buried alive. The weight is just enormous, how it crushes and picks up everything and moves whole towns, including the people in there. 256 people are missing in Colombia as of 8:30 this morning. And they're gone. People are going through the mud and they cannot find them. That is not fun to watch. And that heartache and suffering is just the tip of the iceberg as to what we go through. Jesus told us a student is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the student to be like his teacher, and the servant like his master. In the Gospel of Matthew, he warns us life will be awful. And he hasn't even gotten to natural disasters yet. He's just talking about what life will be like as you bear his name. Don't be surprised if people don't like the God that you worship. And finally, we must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. You say, well, that's an understatement. Well, yeah, this is a vale of tears. There are very few good things to find in this world. There are blessings that our God gives us. And there are some joys, to be sure. And yet we can get sucked in very quickly to the thought, this is the be-all and end-all of life. Instead of realizing that we are but strangers here. Heaven is our home. And mudslides are one really stark reminder of how awful it is to live in this world like that. So you can look at this and you can easily say, people will accuse my God again of not being loving. And how can there be any suffering in anyone's life? And you can still explain that there's a loving God who would allow it. And yet that doesn't really touch it. You can go through sickness. I've been sick all week. I never take naps, and I slept almost constantly for 2 or 3 days. It was awful. And then I saw my children go through the same thing. And I saw reflected in Emerson's eyes how I felt 2 days before that, as she just kind of laid there. Because you're exhausted. And everyone's gone through sickness. But it goes on. Loss of income, death, unhappy marriages. Maybe you're single against your own will. These are just touches some of the problems that we have in this life. And those sufferings, well, they can find their answer in the words of our God. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? That cross that my God embraced, that he grabbed on the Via Dolorosa and walked to Golgotha, that cross is ours. We pick it up and we follow him. And just to be clear, a cross isn't necessarily something that we bring into our own lives from our own rebellion. The cross is anything in our lives that would cause us to question our God. To say, is my God really good? To doubt him. That cross he brings into our life, well, to maybe give us patience. To drive us to humility. Sometimes I get too big for my britches. And I need sickness to knock me down a notch. Sometimes he just brings things into our lives and he doesn't explain why. He says, I've brought this to you so that I might have glory in your life. And because I'm going to bring you out of it. I'm not going to explain how, but it will happen. And you'll honor me. And sometimes we just pray, thy will be done. And that's where it ends. And we don't know why that suffering is there, and it doesn't go away right away. And that's God's answer. That suffering isn't bad. Last week we talked about, could you tell the difference between good and evil if you saw it? And when heartache is brought into someone's life, it can be very difficult for us to sit with that person, and yet that's one of the blessings that we can offer them, is just our time and our prayers and our trust. And say, maybe, well, God saw me through a time in my life, and here I am as a witness to His goodness and how He can still work it out. And we still have God's promise and His word, shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? God answers our prayers. He rescues us from all heartache and sorrow. And yet He does that not by making the world a better place, not by removing all trouble from our life. He did that by going to the cross to rescue our greatest need. He doesn't give you a Band-Aid to put over your life. He gives you a new life, literally. After the life has been removed from your body, you will live again. And on this 5th Sunday in Lent, as we're deep into the season, our God takes time to show us He conquers death. Whether it be for a Shunammite woman in the Old Testament, or whether it be somebody in your life immediately, where you saw that life taken, that life will be restored. And that is what we'll celebrate one day, very soon, on Easter. Dear friends, shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? That answers an objection to Jesus' suffering, but it also answers our objection to our suffering. Amen. Please stand.